In the summer of 1995, China sent a bunch of its troops to the province of Fujian. They then started testing missiles and putting it on TV. They then started running highly publicized combat exercises, very similar to what it would look like to cross this 130-kilometer wide strait to invade the island of Taiwan, a place that China doesn't think is a real country, but rather a part of China itself, a rebellious island province in an unfinished civil war.
Another round of Chinese war games near Taiwan has the U.S. and other nations concerned.
China did all this saber-rattling because Taiwan's president had asked for a visa to visit the United States, and the U.S. Congress voted to give it to him, defying Beijing and undermining China's claim to Taiwan. Oh, and Taiwan was holding their first democratic election.
These are the first free elections of a Chinese leader in 5,000 years.
China announced Friday that it would start the new military exercises less than a week before Taiwan's presidential election.
China hated that all of this was happening on this island that they think is theirs, hence all of the military flexing. But look who shows up next.
Diplomatic trouble may be brewing again between China and the United States.
It's the US military, and they're sending their biggest show of military force in Asia since the Vietnam War, right here in China's neighborhood. President Bill Clinton sent in all of the US's best stuff: aircraft carriers, guided missile cruisers, destroyers, powerful weapon systems from the most powerful military on Earth. So all of this concentrated US military power comes into the region and enters right here, through the Strait of Taiwan. It was a response to China and all of its efforts to intimidate Taiwan. The message was very clear. China, we are way more powerful than you, so back off and let Taiwan do its thing. And guess what? It totally worked. China backed down and the US reasserted itself as the global powerhouse, a power that no one can mess with. Okay, so now let's fast forward to last fall. A lot has changed in this 20 or so years. And China is at it again, flexing on Taiwan. Their favorite way of doing this lately is flying military aircraft into this air border, Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. An ADIZ is airspace that if you enter, you should identify yourself, or else the nearby country will assume that you're coming to attack them. China has started flying military aircraft over this airspace without asking permission, without identifying themselves. Not just like once or twice, but like dozens of times per day, hundreds of times a month. These are the actual recorded flight paths of Chinese aircraft flying over Taiwan's ADIZ, and then back to China. It's a giant FU to Taiwan, or rather, remember who's boss here. Luckily, there's some really amazing data on every single one of these Chinese flyovers. They're all documented.
Taiwan's Air Force scrambled again today.
This is research from the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and it's incredibly useful to see China's activity in Taiwan's ADIZ. You can see this massive surge late last year in flyovers. This is a graph that shows every single time a Chinese jet has flown over Taiwan's ADIZ in 2021. You can see that it comes to a peak in the first week of October. This was the week that China was celebrating its founding, and they were sending a very clear message to Taiwan: you will be ours. That week, this Chinese state-owned publication comes out with this headline: time to warn Taiwan secessionists and their fomenters, war is real. This is not fair play, so guess who shows up to the region to calm things down?
A U.S. warship has sailed through the Taiwan Strait.
So right after this huge bulk of flyovers of Taiwan's ADIZ, the U.S. sends in guided missile destroyers through the Taiwanese Strait, and they're accompanied by a Canadian ship.
To warn off 25 Chinese aircraft that entered its defense zone.
Oh, but this time, it didn't work. Here's when the U.S. sailed through the strait, and here's what China does after. Tons more flyovers of Taiwan's ADIZ. Looking at the raw data, you can see that these flyovers start happening almost every day. It's not the 90s anymore. Things have changed. Bill Clinton can't just send a bunch of naval ships to the Taiwan Strait and expect China to back down. We're living in a different era. The biggest difference is that China's military has become way more powerful in the last 20 years. Add to that their zeal for taking over Taiwan to reunite it with mainland China has grown immensely every year since. The reason I'm telling you this story and showing you the difference between how China reacted in the 90s and how it reacted last fall is because that difference is really important if we want to think about what war looks like in this region. I've been talking to military experts, I've been diving deep into military reports and writings from the Chinese military itself to try to understand what war with Taiwan would look like. It's something that is becoming more likely year by year. So what's to follow is my best attempt at understanding what war in the Taiwan Strait looks like. A war that drags in the United States and its allies. War is impossible to predict, and so we don't know for sure. But what I hope we can do here is look at a scenario and learn how conflict works, and what calculations all the countries involved would have to make in what might become the next world war.
I just want to make China understand that we are not going to step back.
China's aggression against Taiwan is accelerating, and it's blaming the U.S.
Beijing has been getting increasingly tough on Taiwan.
So are you saying that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense?
Yes and yes.
Let's dive into this scenario about potential war between Taiwan and China. Okay, I'm going to dive into a very specific scenario of how conflict could escalate in the Taiwan Strait. But first, I have to say something. I have to get this off my chest, which is I've felt a little bit conflicted making this video. I feel very against the sort of machismo fascination with conflict. Like it's some sort of cool, good thing. When at the end of the day, what we're talking about are people's lives. We are talking about valuable taxpayer money. We are talking about the future of entire societies being ripped apart by a power struggle. This is not sexy and cool. This is a nightmare. Secondly, let us all just acknowledge right now how easy it is to dehumanize China and its leaders and its military. But let me just remind you that China doesn't want war. They don't want bloodshed. They will probably try much less violent ways to try to force Taiwan to the negotiating table before resorting to all-out invasion. But the reason I want to make a video about the nightmare scenario, because even if a military has a goal for a less violent intervention, that's not how war works. Conflict is very messy, and one miscalculation can lead to an escalation in the conflict. And now you have a wildfire that is out of control on both sides. It's incredibly easy for the momentum of conflict to bring us into that kind of situation. And that's why I want to suss out what it could look like. Okay, those are my disclaimers. Let's dive into this. I'm gonna start rolling here. There's 2. Okay, I'm gonna clap. Here it comes. Okay, I need to bring you over to my desk to show you some documents I've been staring at. Any invasion of Taiwan starts with this document. This is a Chinese law meant to stop any parts of China from seceding from China itself. And it mentions Taiwan. It basically says that if Taiwan tries to assert its independence from China, or, and this is the most important part, or if the possibilities for a peaceful reunification should be completely exhausted, that China shall employ non-peaceful means and other necessary measures to protect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Translation, if they run out of diplomatic solutions, China is required by law to invade Taiwan and force it to reunite with China, into peaceful solutions being tried and not working.